I'm literally playing the beta. Like I have a bug right now on my screen. Do you see that? Where's my fucking finger? Up there. It says abandoning event. Why is there a bug? Oh, because I want to do a dungeon. My quests are not there. Why? Oh, because there's a bug. Because I want to do a dungeon. I legitimately feel like quitting this game right now at this point. But I don't want to because I've already spent like 80 hours in the game and I'm close to max level. And I just want to get to max level to just say I got to max level and then just make like an angry ass fucking YouTube video complaining about all the bullshit I had to deal with while playing this game. Come on. Come on. You're joking. I didn't get the kill. So I'm not gonna be able to see what the fuck my quest says because my fucking UI is bugged. But they're not yellow. Look at that man. Stop. Wow. The beam just teleported mid-thing. I love Ford. I'm not playing this game. New World. Before anybody says, the game just came out. Of course it has bugs. It's this company's first MMO. Let me just say, stop sucking this game's cock. They have literally paid a bunch of people to do that for them. Now that that's out of the way, let's take a look at the highly anticipated game that is already pissing everybody off, except Amazon spies. New World is a game with a bunch of issues. And since I've already picked out a few of the issues involving the bugs and the queue time, I'm going to talk about some of the best and worst things about this game. Now let's be real for a second. This is a crafting MMO. And if you like RuneScape or Albion Online, I could probably recommend this game to you in the far future. It has the trade skills that those games love, and that I despise for being as boring as a game of Balloons Tower Defense. Now what motivates me to play an MMO are the rewards. It's fun to build your character to be a Sigma alpha male and walk into low level areas just for people to ignore you. I don't think a single person would chop trees without a nice reward at the end. Considering a majority of the items in the game can be crafted using these trade skills, I think that mark checks off. I don't want to go into detail on how interesting the trade skills are because, let's be frank, they ain't. They're very similar to every other MMO's professions or trade skills, and they give you appropriate rewards according to how much time you like to waste. Right next to the trade skills in this game's UI are the weapon masteries, which is how you set yourself apart from other players as there are no classes to choose from at the beginning. There are a slew of different weapons with 2 different skill trees according to each weapon. One seems to be more appropriate to PvE and one to PvP, which immediately brings up the question, how do I respec my weapon masteries? Well, good news, you can. But bad news, it costs a specific currency that has a cap. Fuck! I don't know what it is with MMOs, but for some reason developers think it's a good idea to give players a hard time to change your build. If I wanted to do a dungeon with the boys, I'd have to spec for PvE to play as optimally as possible. And if I wanted to do a war afterwards, I would have to waste some of the precious currency, Azoth. For anybody who says Azoth isn't even that hard to get, shut up. You know that's not the issue. It's annoying for no good reason, and you know that. Anyways, because there are skill trees, there's of course experience entitled to the various weapons. It's exactly as you'd expect. You kill mobs with a rapier, and you get XP for the rapier. The weapons actually feel pretty good in terms of combat, which I'll touch on in a second. Adjacent to the weapon masteries are the skills or attributes. If you've ever played Dark Souls, this should feel very familiar. There are skills that improve what weapons they correspond with, and there's a skill for health. You get attribute points by leveling up in some main quests. And honestly, I'm not even going to get mad at the weapon masteries or the attributes. They complement each other well, and are done well enough to help the combat feel pretty alright. Combat is the only part of MMOs that doesn't need to be reward driven. In this game, when the mobs aren't bugging out and the servers are smooth, the combat is actually pretty good aside from the player collision. It's like a simpler version of the combat in ESO mixed with a Souls game. You can have 2 weapons equipped and have 3 abilities that you choose from the weapon masteries that help the combat feel like a MMOified version of Dark Souls. There's your roll that helps you stay out of danger unless you decide to wear heavy armor. There's your stamina bar that determines how often you can roll. And there's your light and heavy attacks. Nothing outstanding or anything, but it seems like a combination of a lot of previous games that combines it into a kind of unique experience for an MMO. Kind of. My hugest gripe with the combat by far is the player collision and how it interferes with PvE content or massive PvP content with other players, which I'll touch on later. There are also different resistances on mobs and weaknesses to certain damage types that can add nuance to PvE content, such as certain mobs being weak to jokey pokey damage. Obviously, if certain mobs are resistant to certain weapons, gear probably plays a large part in New World. And also, it's a fucking MMORPG. Gear in New World is pretty good. I like it. Again, borrowing from other games, there's a weight system in accordance to your character's equipment. Think of, I don't know, Dark Souls. If you have a light equip load, you're fast. If not, you're fat. There's also, of course, different rarities, stats, and abilities the gear can have. Everything alongside these fronts is very run of the mill for an MMORPG. Maybe you get a perp sword that has a higher chance to crit, or you get a sword that has a chance to send a beam to nearby enemies and damage them. Again, nothing outstanding or crazy, but it's solid. Moving towards more unique things about New World immediately brings up the factions. There are 3 different factions in the game, sort of like ESO, and you can play alongside the opposing factions in PvE content, just like ESO. Actually, maybe it isn't so unique, but what is unique are the factions paired alongside the territory control. The map is broken into zones, and each zone is able to be controlled by the faction of whichever guild decides to buy the plot of land, or whichever faction wins a war against a different faction. When a faction owns a zone, they're able to tax the poor and make crafting, fast traveling, and housing even more of a bitch than it already is. Also, the owners can choose to upgrade the zone by bolstering the defenses of the fort so it's harder to take the area, or they can upgrade the city's crafting stations. Owning land is actually pretty cool and interactive. I like it. Well, at first glance, anyways. It's immersive and it encourages large-scale instance PvP battles amongst factions. It also encourages faction pride because nobody wants to pay taxes. I think the issue with territory control lies within the 3 different factions. I have yet to see a server where it's a very competitive field between factions and controlling land. It seems like regardless of color, there's a crayon-eating faction, a tree-chopping faction, and a bunch of chads. There are bound to be players of different skill levels and interests while playing the game, but to compartmentalize random players into 3 different factions seems to always leave one faction behind. I haven't seen a single map that looked balanced between all 3 factions. There's a system that tries to balance out the factions by excluding the most popular faction to somebody who chooses or changes their faction. Not only does the system fucking suck for people who like the identity of a certain faction, it definitely isn't doing shit. Not to even mention the empty, boring ass story behind each of the factions. So the only reason people have a bunch of faction pride is because they don't like the other colors covering their map that resembles Risk. Anyways, after deciding your faction, almost all forms of leveling your character have been opened up to you. There's a main questline that gives you a large portion of experience that involves running across the map over and over and over and over and over and over again, with a pretty boring narrative. There are side quests which feel like the same exact thing, but with less rewards tied to them. The quests are incredibly boring and given to you very sparingly. I'm not saying that the questing in any other MMO is great, but WoW at least had those incredible cinematics that made me okay with doing the quest alongside of having a mount. Now, having a mount is a huge point of contingence in New World. The world is relatively small, and mounts would probably make the world feel too small. Therefore, New World opted out of this option. It also seems pretty world PvP based, even though nobody on my server had PvP turned on, unless they were on a mob of 10 players. They seem to also make mounts unavailable so world PvP was more common. The second reason just seems insane, as many other MMOs have mounts alongside Great World PvP. The first reason doesn't make sense in terms of gameplay, but the narrative reason was stupid as fuck. Not having a mount makes the leveling feel super inefficient. For example, two other forms of quests are faction missions and project board tasks. You go to a city or like a faction leader and scoop up a bunch of tedious tasks from the town, such as mining some rocks or killing boars for your faction, and the zone you're in is filled with objectives. The problem is, they're randomly scattered around the zone, making it annoying as fuck to run around without a mount. Even with a mount, it'd be annoying as fuck. Very little effort seems to be put into the quest slash leveling design, and it makes the game feel barren. You are able to level up from world PvP, the instanced wars that occur when a faction wants a territory, random events that pop up in dungeons. But everything I said in terms of leveling just fucking sucked, except the fucking dungeons. The dungeons were pretty interesting. Dungeons were actually the highlight of the game for me. The three that I did had increasingly interesting bosses, rewards, and visuals. I actually love the art in this game, and it saddens me that the gameplay developers couldn't compete. But the dungeons were fun while they lasted. It's a shame they're such a small part of the game though. The mechanics are interesting for the most part, and on par with dungeons I've done in other MMOs. My biggest gripe with these instances is the fact that the player collision is a fucking thing. When you're supposed to stand behind a boss as a DPS and multiple people in the group decide to go melee DPS, it's fucking bad. Everybody's just walking into each other and knocking each other into mechanics. It's also annoying outside of instances when you're doing world PvP. It also doesn't help that the servers don't seem to be the greatest and your character lags around a fuck ton into other people's characters, which knocks each other's around into fucking mechanics. Now, PvP is pretty deep rooted into this game. It appears to be the only real quote-unquote motivating end game. It's pretty alright PvP, but most people can't do that shit forever. Tied with the fact that it doesn't appear to have a high skill cap, well, scratch that, as high of a skill ceiling as other MMOs that have had a huge PvP scene. There's world PvP, the wars I mentioned, and an instance PvP mode called an outpost rush. I actually haven't even touched an outpost rush, but there is a lack of variety for sure. I can't speak much on the endgame of New World as I quit after so many bugs fucked me over. I couldn't stand the UI errors and the fact that I couldn't just reload my UI. I would have to close the game and reopen it to wait in another 4-hour queue. It's ridiculous. The amount of mouths that ended up looking fucked because of bugs was ridiculous. The amount of times an enemy would kill me because of server lag or their mouth bugging out was ridiculous. The fact that PvP sometimes felt choppy because of server lag is ridiculous. The connected Twitch feature that was teased but didn't work for a single time for me is ridiculous. The only thing about this game that was above and beyond for me was the UI and the art. I don't want to play another MMO carried by the art. I already have for 11 years. These aren't even half of the issues I've had in terms of bugs and stability, and it's ridiculous. I cannot feel good about recommending this game to anybody in its current state. It lacks stability, content, and variety. New World is not good.